The entire financial system is changing over into a central bank digital currency, and I have receipts to verify everything you need to know. And stay tuned till the end of this video so I can show you how to best position yourself for this change. Welcome to the AlterNate Vantage. My name is Nate, and this is where I provide a different perspective on finances, news, and generational wealth. If you like this kind of content, then don't forget to like and subscribe. All right. Back to the video. I like cutting to the chase in my videos, so I'm going to start off with the overall goals for a central bank digital currency system, or a CBDC, as stated by the authors of this new CBDC system. I'm also going to show you how it's already being used in the financial markets, and then I'm going to end on how long I think it's going to take us to get to a much larger global adoption. And everything I'm going to show you today is provided by the authors of what they say they're going to do. This is not my own personal opinion. And here's a lot of the questions that are being asked around this idea right now. Number one, do the creators/moderators of a CBDC system want a CBDC? The answer is yes. Are they actively creating systems to support a CBDC? That answer is yes. Are they encouraging political leaders to get on board with these systems? That answer is also yes. Are CBDCs being used today? Yes, they are. And how long will it take us to get there to a majority adoption? Anywhere from 3 to 6 years. With all those questions initially answered, let's jump into the facts so you can see exactly what I mean. So the first thing I'm going to show you are the active CBDC projects or previous CBDC projects that have been instituted by some of the largest financial institutions in the world, such as the Bank of International Settlements and the International Monetary Fund. These projects highlight the overall goals for where they want this financial system to go, what they want it to look like, the features they want it to have. And so you can think of these projects as like a very large sandbox between multiple parties, both public and private and governmental, coming to the same table to decide, okay, what do we want things to look like? Where do we want things to go? So these projects give us a very, very good clue and indicator as far as what things are going to look like overall. The first one I want to mention is a project specifically being headed up by the Federal Reserve and the Monetary Authority of Singapore. The name of this project is CEDAR-X Ubin Plus. It's a combination of two projects. CEDAR-X was a US project, and I think Ubin Plus was a Singapore project. They blended together. They've been coming to the table to test out this concept or test out the idea. And just to kind of give you the highlights of what this platform is about. It's a platform that allows for cross-border payments between differing CBDC types. The reason why this is important, if you know anything about digital wallets and how they communicate and work together, in order for someone to send a CBDC from one person to the other, they both have to have a wallet that's communicating on the same network for them to talk to each other, for them to send finances between each other. So as an example, if you have all these countries right now that are developing a whole bunch of different types of CBDCs, that would imply that, for example, the US would have to have a Euro wallet. It would have to have a Japanese yen wallet. It would have to have a Chinese yuan wallet. It would have to have all these different wallet types to support those currency transfers in those specific CBDC types. Well, if you had a platform that served as like the moderator or the mediator between all these different wallet types, you would greatly reduce the need for every single country to have 60 different wallets just for them to be able to do currency swaps between each other. That is what this project aims to look at, and they have been successful at proving this concept so far. We got an update earlier this year, actually, I think, or excuse me, last year in 2023, which went over some of the details of this project. But that's, like I said, between the Federal Reserve, so the US Central Bank, as well as the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is pretty important because if you don't know what Singapore does, they are a very large financial hub for the rest of the world. The next project I want to highlight, or two projects I want to highlight, is Project Mariana and Project Jura. These projects are kind of similar in what they aimed to accomplish, but essentially they aimed at developing a platform that allows for cross-border payments using wholesale CBDCs. And so what that means is there's going to be different echelons, different scales, different use cases, different access points, depending on the kind of customer you are and the kind of financial institution you are. So a wholesale CBDC would probably be something in the realms of a large monetary authority like Bank of America and HSBC, something along those lines, where they're going to move wholesale tokens, right, digital currencies between each other at that level. Then we also have, for example, retail. And so for those two projects, once again, headed up by the Bank of International Settlements, we have Project Rosalind and we have Project Icebreaker. Both of these are a platform that explores the use of retail CBDCs. That would be like person to person, individual to individual. And their use cases specifically for international transactions, but they're implementing the use of, hey, if you had a Euro CBDC that's being used in retail, but then someone wants to transfer or go over to Africa or go over to Asia, how could they still use that same retail CBDC in that space as well? So it's kind of like a combination of, for example, the US project that was exploring multiple CBDCs coming to the same table. But this just takes a direct look at retail use specifically. And the reason why I really want to highlight this is because if you look at those who are arguing for the benefits of a CBDC, or if you look at those who are saying, oh, well, this isn't going to be something that regular people are going to use. Well, they're starting off with wholesale, kind of communicating that, hey, retail, you don't have to worry about that. We're not really moving in that direction. We're just trying to diminish our costs for international transactions. But if you look at how much effort they're putting into, making this a retail acceptable type platform, it begs the question, I think they're going to move things in that direction overall. The next project, once again, headed up by the Bank of International Settlements, we have Project Helvetia, or Helvetia, however you say that, and you have Project Agora, which I've already talked about specifically on this channel. If you want to see that video, I'll probably put a link or a description or a card or somewhere to link you back into that one. But Project Helvetia is a platform that explores tokenized assets, which is very interesting. And then Project Agora is a platform that explores tokenized deposits. And the reason why both of these are important is because it's taking something in the physical and providing a digital representation. What am I saying? So tokenized assets, that could be something like real estate. So instead of a deed being transferred, which is a paper deed copy, proof of ownership over that property, what they could do is just tokenize that asset. They could tokenize that deed to make the whole thing digital. And now they attach it to a smart contract. And so they know at the conclusion of a real estate transaction, ownership positions automatically shift. It goes from the seller to the buyer, or the buyer to the seller, vice versa. And so it's a programmable digital interface that removes a lot of the middleman in terms of managing these real estate transactions. What's kind of interesting about this is that in the public sector, we already have organizations that have taken upon themselves to tokenize real estate assets, which is pretty interesting. Look into Florida if you want to see some examples of that. Now, the other side of that is the platform that's exploring tokenized deposits. Why is that important? Is because that's essentially discussing the prospect of moving from physical cash into a digital currency. So if you have physical cash, how would you translate that into a deposit that's then being used as a central bank digital currency that could be used for whatever interactions, exchanges you're trying to do? Well, if they have the means of tokenizing deposits that are already existing, what that is essentially representing is they have already proven, because this is something they're trying to roll out right now, they're proving the concept of transitioning what's in your traditional checking accounts, savings accounts, and moving that into a tokenized deposit account, which is now a more fungible, cheaper, more convenient means of exchanging and interacting. And I'll get into I'm not going to call it a conspiracy, but it is what it is. What the Federal Reserve is doing on that front right now. That's a conversation for something a little bit later. And then finally, we have Project Dunbar and we have Project enriched, which both of these are a platform that allows for cross-border payments between differing CBDC types. So very similar to what the US Federal Reserve and Singapore are doing. But this is just at a much larger scale. It's being headed up by the Bank of International Settlements again. And Project enriched has very special significance because you have countries like Saudi Arabia, which is a member of, actually I think they are a member. I'm slipping my mind right now, but they're very tied in with BRICS, obviously 100% member of OPEC, an oil producing company, or not company, but organization. And so it's very important to tie these things together because now we're blending the digital space with global commodities such as oil and everything else. So these initial projects up at the top here represent the larger movements of what's taking place in the CBDC space. And this is just a quick map right here, which kind of gives you an overview of how much effort has been put into this realm, into CBDCs. A majority of the countries worldwide at some point or in some form or fashion are actively developing, researching, or have already deployed a central bank digital currency. As if I'm not mistaken, I think everything in green is a pilot program. So you have, India, you have Nigeria, you have Australia, you have so many different places that have already instituted a pilot program, meaning they're using a central bank digital currency today. Okay, so the second thing, moving beyond what their goals are or the direction that they're heading, is I want to talk about systems that currently exist. So we talked about CBDC projects. I mentioned the BIS. I mentioned what our Federal Reserve is doing. But then I want to talk about the systems and the frameworks that are here right now. So the first one I want to talk about is digital IDs. Digital IDs has been mentioned over and over and over again. That's going to be vital to the overall success of how smart contracts are going to communicate with the information that we're plugging into them. And part of that information we're plugging into them is your digital ID. And what that essentially means is there would be a fully digital representation of who you are and what you own and what you control and how many assets you have, implanted into a token, which can then interface with the blockchain technology, which you can, at that point, kind of direct where you want your deposits to go and where you want your exchanges to go. It's a point-to-point recognition of this person is verified and this person is verified. Now, there's a lot of different implications and things that are kind of scary about what digital IDs actually mean for people. But this is just some of the institutions right now that are working on this type of technology. Visa, as an example, I'm going to talk about them specifically in just a second. We have other large institutions like UBS, MasterCard, what else are on here? Swift, right? JP Morgan and Chase. You have all these global organizations that are all developing digital identity technologies as we speak. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is FedNow. And this might sound a little bit interesting. You may have heard of it, you may not have heard of it, but a hefty portion of our banks right now are using FedNow. What is FedNow? FedNow became the clearinghouse between bank-to-bank transfers. So just as an example, if I have a bank account at Bank of America and I want to send some money to my friend and they have an account at JP Morgan and Chase, if I want to initiate that, then Bank of America has to say to Chase, hey, Chase, we're sending you some money to this account. Does this account exist? Chase says, yes, this account exists. It's in good standing. We can receive the money. And then Chase is going to say, does the person who's sending the money have enough money to send the money? And then Bank of America is going to say, yes, we have enough money to send. And instead of actually moving any money, Bank of America and Chase are just going to readjust their own balance books that they keep between each other. This might sound a little bit confusing. I'll have another video about that in the future, but you can think of it as credit swaps. So no money is actually moving. It's just numbers changing on a screen. Now, that's a lot of work for banks to do. And we have third parties who handle similar transactions or similar roles like that already. But what our Federal Reserve did is said, hey, we'll be the clearinghouse between banks. Just give us all the information on your account holders. And now we'll be the ones, the adjudicators, to decide, yes, this person has enough to send. Yes, this account is in good standing. Initiate the transaction. And so our Federal Reserve developed the FedNow service to stand in that position, which essentially and functionally turns our regular US dollar into a US CBDC already. It's a centralized bank digital currency that's being authored and controlled at a central location as far as what you can and cannot do with your money. So that's already being used. That technology is important because it kind of sets a foundation for where we can go in the future. Okay, next one up is Swift. So Swift is I think, Society for Worldwide Interactions and Trade, something like that. But Swift is the number one used messaging technology. So they're kind of like a standard operating procedure for sending and receiving capital between banks and how they formulate those messages in what's called message text. And so Swift is the standard. They handle a majority of all international transactions to this day. And so Swift is in the process of discussing right now. They're moving into trials, I should say, of creating a digital asset trials. And so what they say is their initial use cases will focus on payments, foreign exchange, securities, and trade to enable multi-ledger delivery versus payment and payment versus payment transactions, the announcement said. And this is just my translation for you can understand what's going on. What that essentially means is they want to tokenize everything, which if you caught it, securities, very important. That could also move into things like the stock market and things like that. Another thing they're doing is they're working on cross-border payments, and they're seeking a footing in proof of value experiment. That's also important because when you hear terms like, instead of calling things like money and calling it a token of value, they're already using a language that's moving away from what we understand traditionally, dollars, cash, things like that, moving into a tokenized world where they're quantifying everything in terms of value. They're also been involved in quick, easy, predictable, delivering the payments experience customers expect. And so they're moving on to the conversation of, hey, we're going to make things convenient, we're going to make things quicker, we're going to make things more transparent. But the caveat to that is, they're using token technology, central bank digital currencies. I'm not going to get into all of that today. I'll probably, have a page at some point where I can share all these links so you can read it for yourself. But, the links are there present in the video if you want to manually type them, and you can get all the facts for yourself. Okay, the next one, which is very, very important. So ISO 20022. This is kind of like an update to Swift. It's not Swift, but it's an update to Swift. Swift is using it. Why is it important? Because it is standardizing how banks communicate between each other. So like I said, Swift handles a majority of transactions right now, international transactions, but not all of them. You have a lot of interbank countries, organizations, and banks that serve as the mediator for international transactions. Singapore is just one of those examples that I mentioned before. But when you move into the conversation of standardizing the messaging format that banks are using, you can think of it like an email, the who, what, when, where, why in the email that's being sent from one institution to the next institution. What it does is it cuts down costs of, deliberation between those institutions of like, hey, you're missing this information, or hey, I need something specific here. And so ISO 20022 was developed so that banks can cut down on these costs. The thing about it is that ISO 20022 was optimized to interact with smart contracts. And so what they've done is they've created a standard language that is very easily modifiable and very easily it can be interjected with new information, and the technology being used can automatically essentially clean up that information that's being applied to the contract. So that way, when the other end user receives it, it's already in the format that's recognized by them. So it's pretty interesting, and it's very, very robust at this point. And even for the US, we've already announced that we'll be rolling over to the ISO 20022 standard by 2025, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, a few others to mention, very important. Visa, I also unleashed. I launched a video on Visa. I'll probably link that to you as well. But Visa has been making some big moves. Number one, they bought Ripple, which is like a $900 million deal. They're already announcing the token transformation. It's on their website. Highly recommend you read it. But they're providing token solutions for everything you can think of: retail, wholesale, assets, securities, the whole nine yards. And they are improving their functions to provide more what they call financial inclusion and digital services, which essentially means they're trying to get this technology pushed out to as many people as possible. That way they have access to this means of exchange. And then finally, under systems and framework, things that are already being used, we have BRICS-Pay, which was developed by the BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and the many, many other countries that are also on board with this. But this is an active system that they're using right now called BRICS-Pay. It uses QR codes, but it's very, very similar to token technology. And a couple of things that they highlighted on their webpage is something like this: the Bretton Woods era global financial system is undergoing a significant transformation. BRICS is calling it out, but many people are missing it. We are moving away from the traditional standard US dollar, and we're becoming closer and closer and closer to central bank digital currency technologies. Hopefully everything I've showed you so far is giving you some evidence of that. Okay, finally, let me talk about timelines. So how long is it going to take us to get there? How long do they say they're going to take to get there? And what does that mean for us? Okay, so the timelines. This is coming from the Financial Stability Board. This is a new organization that I learned about relatively recently. But they essentially consist of the G20, which is some of the most powerful countries in the world. And for those of you in the US, yes, it includes the United States, just so you know. And the FSB's primary task is to monitor the global financial system. It is also to develop and coordinate financial sector policies, which is very important from a CBDC discussion standpoint. They oversee the implementation of those policies, and they play a role in preparing and managing financial crises. And so at their G20 meeting in Brazil this year, what they said is they are about halfway through G20's 2020 roadmap to make cross-border payments cheaper, faster, more transparent, and accessible by 2027. Everything that was just described here are all of the goals that the BIS and all these projects have been trying to accomplish since about 2016 when they started working on some of these projects. And so these are their words, right? Go into their timeline here. It says the goal was to make cross-border payments cheaper, faster, more transparent, and more accessible by 2027. Anything else to really highlight in there? No, not really. So that's what they want to do. So what they estimate or what they project is that by 2027, the cross-border improvements will be completed and adopted across 75% of all international banking operations, which is massive. Right now, I think it's like 80% of all transactions around the world take place in US dollars. That's trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars every single day. So if we moved to an adoption of 75% of all international banking operations by 2027, that is the institution of a new banking system, whether you like it or not. Whether or not that's happening at a wholesale level, whether or not it's happening at a retail level, the system's there. So that's just very important. In 2025, so coming up next year, they anticipate this to be the first phase of digital ID implementation. And this was coming from, I think, another Visa initiative or a MasterCard initiative, something along those lines. But either way, that's the timeline. So anywhere as soon as 3 years down the road, or 2.5 really, getting to 2027, they want 75% of the world from an international level participating in this new system that's faster, cheaper, and more transparent. And then I would say anywhere from, probably 3 years after that, we would see more adoption on the retail level. So we'll see some inclusion. Like, for example, Citibank has already developed like their own Citi token or Citi coin. That's for wholesale institutional type accounts. So I do anticipate that by around the same time frame, they'll also start rolling out more retail accounts to get involved in this space, so that can be kind of beta tested. And then roughly 3 years after that, you'll be looking at full, complete transition over. So that means between now, which is 2024, and 2030, which is 6 years down the road, you're looking at the complete transition of the financial system and the direction we are going. Okay, I know I just covered a bunch of information and I just threw it at you. And here are the most important things that you need to keep in mind to protect yourself during this transition. And it's not anything too complicated. It's actually rather simple. You need to be thinking about assets. You need to get your hands on assets. Why? Because the most likely case, as we have witnessed in other financial transitions, what's going to happen is the value of a dollar is going to go down. So even though the price tags on everything is going up, it's really taking place because the value of a dollar is going down. And if that is the case, you have your hands on the assets where intrinsically they're holding their value or they're growing at a larger value if you got it in the right market and at the right time. So that way you can protect your wealth through this transition. May you have a choice in 2030 as to whether or not you participate? Probably not. They're probably going to strong arm a lot of people into forcing them into that new financial system, trying to get rid of cash, trying to get rid of traditional deposits and everything else. So if you are forced in that scenario, at the very least, you'd want to have an asset that can be transitioned into that side where you can maintain some of your wealth and, of course, be prepared to be taxed beyond belief. Okay, so assets. What assets would I get my hands on? First and foremost, gold and silver. Thirdly, real estate, and finally, whole life insurance, which is an asset. It can transition through these financial times and allows you some liquidity. So as those times come where you can buy more assets, then you have the liquidity to make it happen because you're leveraging whole life insurance. I'll make more videos about that in the future. I didn't want today's video to be too long. I wanted it to be kind of short and to the point, but here we are, nearly coming up on 30 minutes. So with all of that said, I hope you enjoyed this content. If you learned something new, please don't forget to like and share this video with someone else who has no idea what's happening, because I think more people need to know about this so they can be prepared for it and make better decisions for the future. So thank you again for being here. God bless you, and I will catch you in the next one.